Period. On the pasuk Vesakois, Vesashaloch, Vesayanshuf, Rashi first quotes the word Hashaloch and interprets Pirshu Rabbeinu. Our rabbis interpreted Ze Hashoyle Dogim Minayom. This pasuk is amongst the list of the 24 birds which are prohibited in eating. They're called Tameitika birds that defiled were not allowed to eat. Amongst them the eagle, Nesher, and others. So one pasuk says Vesakois, Vesasholoch, Vesayanshuf. These are three distinct birds. Now Rashi first quotes the word Hasholoch, which is the middle bird in the verse, and he explains Pirshu Rabbeinu. Our rabbis interpreted Ze Hashoyle Dogim Min Hayom. This is a reference to a bird that pulls fish out of the water. V'zeu shetirgem Unkelus, and this is that Unkelus translated V'shalei Nuna. V'shalei means and he pulled out. Nuna is a fish. V'shalei Nuna means he pulls out fish. And afterwards he interprets the other two species, Kois and Yanshuf, as we will explain later. Now, the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, says we need to understand in Likutei Sicho, volume 7, page 54. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says we need to understand A. In this verse it says Hakois before Hashaloch. Why does Rashi change their order in his interpretation and interprets the word kois only after his interpretation on Hashalach? In footnote 3, Rashi's, the Rebbe points out, it is obvious one cannot say that since his interpretation in kois comes together with his interpretation in Yanshuv, therefore he interprets it after interpreting Hashalach, because Yanshuf was said in the verse after Hashalach. If that was the case, then to the contrary, he should have interpreted according to the order of the pasuk. Since Hakois says in the pasuk before Hashalach, so Rashi had interpreted immediately, and while he was there, interpret also Yanshuf before interpreting Hashalach. So we still remain with the question, why does he change the order and first interpret the word and only interpret the word kois after interpreting the word Hashalach? When Rashi, question B, when Rashi says the interpretation of the other types of birds in the parsha, even interpreting the words kois v'yanshuv, which are in this very verse, he doesn't bring a source to his interpretations. Why over here by Hashalach he writes Pirshu Rabbeinu, our rabbis interpret it, and he even adds, and this is that Unkelus translated, etc. And he doesn't satisfy merely with saying the interpretation itself. This is the one who pulls out the fish from the sea. The wonder is even greater. When Rashi brings from Targum Unkelus, from the translation of Unkelus, a proof to his commentary, and the reason that you need proof is because this interpretation is not so smooth. So he uses the expression v'chein tirgim, and likewise Unkelus also translated or something similar. Why does he say in our pasuk the unusual expression v'zehu shetirgim chulu, which from this it is implied that he is here not to bring a proof from Targum Unkelus, but to explain the Targum, and this is totally not understood. Rashi wrote his commentary on Chumash, not on Targum Unkelus, Question D. In order to know what shalach means, at first glance it would suffice when Rashi would say hashoyle dogim, one who pulls out fish. We know that fish are located in the sea, as the Targum Unclus translates v'shalei nuno, and he pulls out fish. Why does Rashi have to add that he pulls out the fish from the sea? After Rashi explains the word hashalach, he continues, Kois v'yanshuf hem tzuitus hatzoyakim balayla v'yesh lahem lesatais ka'adam v'oid acher doimaloi shekoirin javets. And he says, Kois and yanshuf, they are tzuitus. There's a type of bird that the French called shwita, which shout at night. And apparently the word tzuita means shouting, because they shout at night, and they have cheeks like a man. And there's another bird that's similar to these two birds that is called javets. Learning the commentary of Rashi at first glance, it seems that the words va'id acher doimeloi chulu, they come into continuation to the very beginning of his commentary, hein tzuitus chulu. In other words, speaking about the two species of birds, kois and yanshuf, Rashi explains, hein, these two birds, one of them is tzuitus chulu, va'oid acher doimeloi, and the other one, which is similar to tzuitus, shekoirin javets, that you call javets. And this, that Rashi says also by tzuitus, plural, hatzoyakim chulu v'yesh lohem chulu, that they shout and they have cheeks, although he's talking over here merely about one species of bird, either kois or yanshuf, it is because, unlike other species, about the species of tzuitus, we speak in a plural, just like we find in Hebrew, the holy language of Hebrew. For instance, that by certain species, by certain objects, for instance, water, we use a plural sense, mayim. We don't say may. And for this reason, Rashi calls also the name of the species tzuitus and not tzuit, with the addition of the letter sin at the end of the name, which shows on the French language on a plural, just like in Yiddish and English, because in this species we always use a language which refers to the birds as a plural. But in actuality, we cannot learn so, because in addition to the fact that Rashi himself, in his Pirush on Gemara, the Gemara is in Chulin, page 63a, so he explains the same species in a lashon yachid, in a singular tzuit or tzuita, and likewise in Gemara Brachas, one of them is called kipoif in Aramaic. So he calls it tzuita with an aleph at the end. Sometimes it's with a hey at the end. Sometimes with an aleph at the end. In the end of this pirush itself, Rashi says that this second species, javets, is similar to him, to tzuitas in a singular. So we cannot say that on a tzuita you can only use a plural. And it's also hard to say that in the same interpretation, first Rashi should talk about this species in a plural and afterwards in a singular. From this it is understood that with his interpretation, they are the tzuitas that shout at night, and they have cheeks like a man. In a plural, Rashi comes to interpret both species, that both the kois and the yanshuf, They are the bird that's called shwita. In other words, although in French both species are referred to with the same name, under the category shwita, you have both the kois and yanshuf. However, the pasuk separates them through two separate names, kois and yanshuf, because in Hebrew there is no such, in the holy language of Hebrew, there is no such name which includes both of them together. However, since it is hard to say that in Hebrew there shouldn't be a general name for both types of shvitas, which have a similarity amongst them, which therefore in French they're referred to with one general name. Therefore, Rashi adds another interpretation, that since also the species javits is similar to the shvita, so we're also able to say that one of these, either the kois or the yanshuf, is a name for all types of shvita, and the second species is javits. It is, however, not understood, since it is smoother to say, as mentioned above, that with these two names, the pasuk means two separate species, and not such that could be signified as two branches of the same species itself. Why does Rashi learn in the beginning of his interpretation, which is the main interpretation, that kois and yanshuf are both included in the species shvita? Therefore, we must learn that the words kois and yanshuf, they carry in themselves a certain meaning that shows that with this is meant the species shvita. And due to this, even in his second interpretation, that one of them means javits, Rashi emphasizes it is similar to him, that this that we can say that either kois or yanshuf means javits, it's only because he is similar to shvita. So we need to understand where does in the words kois or yanshuf, is there an implication, is there implied the meaning on the species shvita? At first glance we could have explained this, that Rashi learns in the beginning of his interpretation that kois and yanshuf are both shvita. It is because he heard so from his rabbis. And since, in order to know which bird is called with a specific name, it is not, we cannot say, oh, I have this idea, maybe it means this, or maybe it means that. The only source on this is only Masoda, tradition. It was handed down from his rabbis. Therefore, Rashi writes in the beginning of his interpretation, which is the main part of his interpretation, that both are shvitas. Even afterwards, that Rashi learns further that it could be that one of them is javits, as it makes sense according to the intellect, that these two words from the pasuk are as a reference to two separate species, that even in French they're noted, they're recognized as two separate species. Nevertheless, he adds, doimeloi, similar to it, because in order to be able to learn that kois or yanshuf is javits, other than he had heard from his Rebbe that both are shvitas, Rashi is relying on the fact that javits is similar to shvita. And due to their similarity amongst them, so also the second species of Java was accepted as a shvita. In other words, that also the second interpretation is founded on the tradition. This was a way we could have explained it. However, this explanation doesn't hold any water. Because, why not? Because in his commentary on Gemara, Rashi says clearly that karya, which is the uncleist translation for kois, is javits. And kipufa, which is the targum of yanshuf, is shvita. And it is understood that also his interpretations on Shas, in the Gemara, in the Talmud, concerning names of words, he received from his rabbis. So it is hard to understand why in his commentary on Chumash he would accept in the beginning and main interpretation that both of them, both Kos, Karya, and Yanshuf, Kipufa, are Shmitas, are different than in his interpretation on the Talmud, on the Gemara. Also, in the interpretation of the word Tinshemes, which is in a later pasuk as the name of another bird that was prohibited to be eaten, we find that is in commentary on Chumash, on the Torah, Rashi changes compared to his commentary on the Gemara, on the Talmud. In his commentary on the Gemara, Rashi says two interpretations on Tinshemes. First, he explains that this is a reference to a chwit, and then he says, and to me it seems that it is called kalbasuritz. Which one of these words is a French word for a mouse, so a field mouse. That is called a field mouse. In his Pirush, in his commentary on the Torah, he says, with just plainly, that Tinshemes is kalbasuritz, which is his own interpretation, different than the one he had received from his rabbis, and the interpretation of chwit, which he had received from his rabbis, he doesn't mention altogether, not even as a second commentary, despite the fact that it is the first in his commentary on the Gemara. However, there's a difference between these two cases. Over here, by the commentary on Tinshemes, it is understood the reason for the change. Although by Rashi himself, it comes out, nearly it seems to him, that Tinshemes is kalbasuritz. However, in his commentary on the Talmud, which concerns the halacha, because halacha is going to be built on the Talmud, he doesn't want to totally build, or even in a basic way, on the pshat that seems to him, and he brings therefore, first and foremost, the commentary that he had heard from his Rebbe. For this reason itself, since it concerns the halacha, he brings also his Pirush, his commentary. Because the same way he must consider a commentary that he had heard from his Rebbe, likewise he's also not allowed to conceal the commentary that comes out by him. It's merely that concerning the halacha, it weighs by him over the commentary that he had received from his rabbis, and therefore his commentary is the second. However, in his commentary on the Torah, where he teaches the psukim according to the way of pshat, he doesn't hold that he has to teach according to what he received from his Rebbe. By him himself, it seems that the pshat, that the meaning is a different way, and therefore he brings only his interpretation. And the Rebbe continues in footnote 17. One may say that the proof of Rashi, that in Shemes is kalbasuritz, like he explains himself, since we find amongst the reptiles, the shratzim, we find also a Tinshemes, and over there it's a reference. Everybody agrees that Tinshemes of shratzim is the insect that we call in French talfa. It makes sense to say that Tinshemes in the birds is similar to talfa, which everybody agrees that it is Tinshemes of the shratzim. Accordingly, we'll understand also what Rashi says in his Pirush on the Chumash, when he talks about Tinshemes of the birds, that Tinshemes that said in shratzim is similar to it, etc. At first glance, this pasuk is talking about Tinshemes of the birds. Why does it concern us over here? What is the meaning of Tinshemes of shratzim? Because that is the proof on the fact, on his interpretation, that the Tinshemes of birds is kalbasuritz, as mentioned above. However, concerning the interpretation of Kos and Yanshuf, that even due to intellect, it makes sense to say, as mentioned above, that these two names are two separate species. So the question remains, the above mentioned question remains. Why does he learn in the beginning, in the main interpretation, that they are treatise, and not as is an interpretation on the Gemara, that kois is a separate species, Javits? Even greater wonder. Even his second interpretation in Chumash does not totally similar. It's not totally. It doesn't straighten out with his commentary on Gemara. In his commentary on the Gemara, Rashi says in a clear way that kois karya is Javits, and Yanshuv kipufa is Shwita. However, in his second commentary on Chumash, he says merely that one of these two, kois and Yanshuv, is Javits, and the second one is Shwita, not saying which one it is. Another question, another thing that we need to understand over here. In the interpretations of Rashi by the names of the birds in Chumash, there are three manners how he explains them. There are names of birds that Rashi explains them merely on French, without giving any signs to be able to recognize them. Just like nates, where he gives only this French name Isparver, nates the hawk, which he gives only the French name Isparver. By other of the birds, to the contrary, he says merely the way we can recognize them, signs that we can recognize them by day, and not how they're called in French. Like by Shalom, that he pulls fish from the sea. And there is a case in which he interprets the names of the birds through both ways, like by Koisan Yanshu, they are Shwitas. And he also adds Hatsoyakim Balayla, that they shout at night, V'yesh lahem l'sotais ka'adam, and they have cheeks like a man. And the Rebbe points out in footnote 18, there are names of birds that he doesn't interpret them altogether. And the Rebbe says that we can explain this in one of two ways. A, because the student knows it from himself, just like Nesher, which is usually translated as an eagle. And this is the reason why Rashi brings it in his commentary from the Pasuk in Yisro 19:4, and he doesn't interpret it over there. And see that in Ezra over here, in Pasuk at Gimel, he just says Nesher Yadua, it is known. B, that it's altogether not there, and therefore commentary is not going to help. Like for an example, Peres and Osniyot that come in the pasuk right after Nesher, which the Gemara points out in Chulin that they're not available in settled land; they're only in the deserts and stuff, etc. And similarly, one might say concerning the other birds that the student doesn't know on his own, which he doesn't interpret, and likewise in the Shratzim concerning Koyach, which he doesn't interpret. So there's three ways, those that he interprets, there's three ways that how he interprets. We said one way is he gives only French, and others he says only signs which he can recognize. And there's a case in which he interprets the names through both ways, like by Koisan Yanshuv, where he says they're Shwitas, and he also adds that they shout at night and they have cheeks like a man. Concerning the first two cases, we could say that Rashi uses with these French words only in a case that through describing the signs of the bird, the Ben Chamish Lamikra won't know exactly what bird this is. However, concerning the third way, in which Rashi explains the type of the bird through both methods, through his French name and also through his own description, for instance, Kois and Yanchuf. So an explanation is demanded. Since Rashi accepts that we need to translate on French Shwitas, so why does he have to also add to it the interpretation that they shout at night, etc., if the French word is enough by nates, by hawk? For instance, why shouldn't it be enough by Kois and Yanshuf? The explanation in all of this, according to the way of the Pshat, it makes sense to say that the name of each thing shows on her quality, on her description, as the Even Ezra, whose commentary is also according to the way of Pshat, just not the way of Pshat of Rashi, explains by all names of the birds how this name expresses the behavior or the look or something similar of this bird. And therefore, for his commentary that Shalach is a reference to pulling fish out of the sea, Rashi has to first intercede that Pirshu Rabbi Seinu, that our rabbis explained it, because otherwise the Svara would have been tilted to say, as the Even Ezra says, that Shalach is a bird that has the tendency and the nature to throw away his children. Since the word Shalach is closer, equalizing with all letters to the lashon of throwing than to the lashon of pulling out, especially that in meaning hashlocha means you throw from above below, which is the opposite of shoila, which is from below above. Therefore, Rashi says, Pirshu Rabbi Seinu ze hashoila dogim chulu. Our rabbis have explained this is the one who pulls out fish, etc. That so our rabbis explained, interpreted. In other words, since it is not an union of a drash, of a medrash, but it is pirshu, it is interpretation that our rabbis taught us. So it's impossible to choose any other interpretation which is more according to the way of pshat. As mentioned above, that concerning a interpretation, we have to a translation of a word, we have to interpret according to tradition. Now the student can ask a question, just like by shalach. So the quality to pull fish, likewise, by other birds other prey birds that prey on other animals, whether fish or birds, there's also this quality to pull. Some other, they pull something else. They pull a different bird, they pull. Why do we call only pulling fish is called with the name shalach? For this Rashi adds, Hashoyle dogim min hayam. He pulls the fish out of the sea. All the birds of prey, they pull only things that are above on the surface. However, this bird, since he pulls the fish from the depth of the sea, as the Gemara in Chulin says that Rabbi Yochanan, when he would see a shalach, a bird that pulls fish from the sea, he used to say, Mishpotecha tahoim rabo. Your judgment is the great depth of the ocean. And as Rashi says, ad tahoim rabo, till the depth of the ocean. Tahoim is actually a reference to the floor of the ocean, which shows, and it says tahoim rabo, means that we're talking about a deep ocean or a deep sea, and he dives deeply into the sea to pull out this fish. And this quality of picking up and pulling out is by him in a very obvious and great manner, not like by the other birds that are pulling of their prey is from the dry land or even from the sea, but from above the surface. Therefore, only for him it fits the name Shalach. Accordingly, we will also understand what Rashi continues, that Onkelos translated V'shalinuna, because from this he's bringing a proof that it is possible to call the bird with the name Shalach from the Lashon Shoyle, he's pulling out, although the general quality of Shoyle, it is not divided from other birds. From this, that the name of the bird in Aramaic is Shaleinuna, which Onkelos, with his translating V'shalinuna, doesn't come interpret and explain the qualities of this bird. He merely translates, as Rashi is very precise in his language, this is that Onkelos had translated. He merely translates its name in Aramaic. In other words, that the bird is named after the fact that he pulls out. So therefore it makes sense to say that also the name Shalach in Lashon Kodesh is due to the fact that he pulls out, as mentioned above. And therefore Rashi says the language, V'zeu shatirgen chulu, because his proof from the Targum that on Shalach it fits the language shoyle that he pulls out is indeed through explaining the Targum, through his explanation that Onkelos translates V'shali Nuna. It is that therefore the bird is called with this name because he pulls the fish. Therefore it comes out the proof that this is also the reason of the name Shalach in Hebrew as mentioned above. According to what we mentioned above, that Rashi looks to explain how the names of the birds show on their concept, we will also understand the reason why after Rashi explains that Kais and Yanshuf are Shvitas, he adds that they shout at night and they have cheeks like a man. Although the student understands French, therefore he doesn't have to explain you what esbraver is, that it's a hawk, because with this he hints how these qualities of Shvitas are hinted in the names Kois and Yanshuf. Kois is from the Lashon Mechuse. It is covered. It shows on something, some connection with night, the opposite from day and light, when everything is covered with the darkness of night. And likewise, by Yanshuf, the name itself, from the Lashon Neshef, shows on night. And their connection with night, Rashi learns that in the fact that they're Shvitas because they shout at night. But with this itself, Rashi does not satisfy himself. Why not? Because there are other species of birds with this quality that have a special connection with night. For instance, the chamas, which flies at night. So we have to say that the Shvitas are called Kais and Yanshuf. It is not only because these names show on night, but also because of an additional quality of these birds that are denoted in the words Kais and Yanshuf. And this is that Rashi continues, V'yesh lahem lasatais ka'adam. They have cheeks like a man. Also this concept is denoted in their names, because with this that their cheeks are full and they stick out like by people and not inward drawn like by other birds, it fits to compare them to a cup which can include in itself water, contain in itself water or other drinks. Likewise also concerning Yanshuf, the Talmud, the student already learned in a previous Sedra that Neshifa means to blow, which is also a reason why night is referred to as Neshef, because you blow away the day and the night comes. By blowing, the cheeks become full and they stick out. And therefore, this is the meaning of the word Yanshuf. This is why the word Yanshuf means Shvitas that have cheeks like a man. However, with the concept that they have cheeks like a man itself, Rashi is not satisfied. For Rashi, it's not enough. Because this, that they have cheeks like a man, they have nothing to do with the quality. It has to do with the build of the bird. And it makes sense to say that the name should express the quality, which is the main thing than the build or the look. And just like we see by the name Shalach, that it signifies this quality of this character of pulling out fish. And therefore Rashi accepts as the first detail the concept of shouting at night, which is the description of a shvita, the description of what it does. Just since it's still not satisfying, therefore he adds they have cheeks like a man. However, over here, the student can ask a question. From this itself, that one bird is called kois and another yanshuf, this implies that the difference between these two species of bird expresses itself in the difference between their names. However, according to mentioned above, that both names, both the kois and the yanshuf, they both show on the same quality, that they shout at night and on the same build, that they have cheeks like a man. So this means that these names, they show only on the general qualities of shvitas, but not on the specific qualities in which they are differentiated, one species of shvit from the other. So why does one shvit called kois and the other with the name yamshuf? Therefore Rashi adds another one is similar to him that he called javits. There's another bird which is merely similar in build to the shvit. In other words, it has only cheeks like a man. It is, however, it doesn't shout like at night, and therefore we can say that the difference between kois and yanshuf is that one of them shows also on this quality of shouting at night, and it's called shvita, and the other one shows merely on the concept of cheeks like a man, and therefore he's called with javits. But he doesn't have a proof according to the way of pshat which is kois and which is yanshuf. Now, the Rebbe points out in footnote 34, at first glance it makes sense to say according that the kois is the javits and the yanshuf is the shvit. Why? Because the comparison of cheeks, like those of a man, is connected more to kois than to yanshuf. Because these cheeks are like a cup, but yanshuf doesn't show on the cheeks themselves, just on what happens from them. That when when your cheeks are full, then you can blow. Neshef, which is the content of the word yanshuf, means night. However, kois, also, when we'll explain that it is from the lashon kisui, so kisui is not night, merely that in the night the things are covered. However, this pshat, Rashi says only as a second pirush, because according to this pshat, it would come out that one of these two names shows only on the build of the bird and not on her quality. And in Sicho, in intellect, it seems to say, as mentioned above, that when something is called with a name that signifies something in this thing, so first of all, it is done in connection to the quality of the thing. And therefore Rashi accepts in the beginning and the main pirush, they are shvitas. And accordingly it comes out that the names kois and yanshuf, they show on the quality of shouting at night, as mentioned above. And this is the explanation why Rashi intercedes his commentary on Shalach before he explains kois, because his pirush in Hashalach, zeh hashoyle dogim, that the shalach is one who pulls out fish, that the name shalach is because of this quality of the bird. This proves that in plain this is also in the other names of the birds, and therefore it makes sense to say, like the first interpretation, that kois and yanshuf are shvitas. From the concepts of Yeina Shal Torah in our Pirush commentary of Rashi, concerning Shalach, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, when he saw a Shalach, he would say, Mishpatecha Tahim Rabba, your judgment reaches till the depth of the ocean. And Rashi interprets, Mishpatecha Af B'Tahim Rabba, your judgment is also in the depth of the ocean. Shezimanta Shalach, you have provided a Shalach, Lishpoi, to judge, V'lasis Nikim Moscha, to do your revenge with Gasa Yam and certain fish of the sea, Lahomis Hamzumonim Lamos, to kill those who are designated that they should die. And from this Gemara, the Alter Rebbe brought a proof to the sheet of the Baal Shem Tov that all concepts are divine providence, not like those who say that divine providence is only in the species of man, because we see that even on fish there is a specific law and rule, and God provides the shalach that he should catch these specific fish on which was ruled the rule above that it's time for them to die. And this concept Rashi denotes with the words Pirshu Rabbi Seinu Za'ashoy Ledogim Min Hayom, as we'll explain. It is known that the word nature, the Hebrew word for nature, teva, is from the language tubu b'yamsuf. They were sunk, they drowned in the Red Sea. And the interpretation in this is just like things that are drowned in the sea. So they exist in them in a very complete manner. It's merely that you don't see them because the sea conceals over them. Likewise, it is also the concept of nature. Also in nature there exists godliness. And as mentioned above, that all events in the world and all the details and the most specific details of details are divine providence from God. Just what? The cloth of nature are according to the will of the Creator, made such that they conceal the godly vitality, that you shouldn't see it in a revealed manner. And this is the hint in the words of Rashi, Hasholoch. Pirshu Rabbi Seinu Za'ashoy Ledogim Min Hayom. Our rabbis interpreted this is the one who pulls fish out of the sea. That Pirshu Rabbi Seinu concerning Sholoch, the Pirush that our rabbis say in connection with him, this is what takes out the fish from their concealment, the sea. If not for this above mentioned Gemara about Sholoch, we could have thought that the conduct by fish is, God forbid, in a way that it just happened so. And the way it seems at first glance from the language of the Gemara, just like the fish of the sea, whoever is bigger, physically bigger from his friend, swallows him up, etc. And this above mentioned interpretation from our rabbis concerning Sholoch, taking out the fish from their concealment of the sea, and takes out the fish from the concealment of the sea, and shows that their conduct is in divine providence. And from this we learn also concerning all other animals and or fish and fauna, and also concerning the plants, and even concerning the silent, like the rocks, that all their concepts are divine providence. Till here is what the Rebbe's interpretation of and explanation of the Rashi. I just wanted to add one aspect of why we see that from 24 names of birds, there's only about 8 or 9 that Rashi translates into French, and the others he doesn't. The reason is because, as mentioned above, where does Rashi pick up the French words that he gives? Most of them are most of them are the ones that he heard from the rabbis. We mentioned in the names of birds, there's only one that he didn't hear from the rabbis, but even in that bird, he heard a French translation of the rabbis and he rejected it and came up with his own. Rashi is not responsible to, we all know Rashi, when he doesn't know, sometimes he says, Lo yadaiti, I don't know. Over here, there's no concept in saying, I don't know. Obviously you don't know. If you knew, you would interpret, you would give us the French name, because that would be the easiest way to identify which bird it is. Now, how does Rashi know? The only way Rashi would know is if his rabbis gave a French name. So we're just moving the question from Rashi and the rabbis. If the rabbis were nice enough to explain to Rashi the names of the birds, why did they select only these 9 birds? What do we find, what is the common denominator of these 9 birds versus the other birds, that only these birds do his rabbis interpret in French and not the others? And we'll find one common thread, one common denominator in these birds that Rashi interprets in French. That all of these birds are mentioned in the Gemara. We find that when it came to Chumash, Rashi kind of learned it on his own. He learned it with his father, so whatever his father knew, he explained. If he didn't know a name, he just told him the Hebrew name. But when he learned the Gemara, so the rabbis that taught the Gemara, every bird that's named in the Gemara, they didn't satisfy with the fact that there's some Aramaic or Hebrew name. They have to tell you what it's in French. So all these names of all these birds that happen to be mentioned in the Gemara, that the rabbis saw a reason to explain it in French, unlike Nesher, although Nesher also comes in the Gemara, but the Nesher everybody knew, at least in the times of Rashi's rabbis. So that's why they weren't explained. Now, so we find that if we look at what the words that are translated into Shvita and Javits are Karya and Kipoifa, which are the Targumim that Unklis gives on Kois and Yanshuv. However, Rashi has proof from the pasuk itself, from the word Kois and from the word Yanshuv, that both of them are Shvitas. So he says the Kois and Yanshuv, they're both Shvitas. And they're called Shvita because they shout at night. And they also have cheeks like a man. That's another reason why they're called Kois and Yanshuv. And there's another one similar to it, and we already explained similar to the Kois, that we call Javits. So now we'll go back and we'll say, why are they both Shvitas? Because they both shout at night. Shvitas they're called because they shout. The other one, that's called Javits, only has cheeks like a man and doesn't shout. So even though they both shout, but the shout of the Yanshuv is louder than the shout of the Kois. And even though the Kois and the Yanshuv, they both have cheeks that stick out, the cheeks of the Kois